Hi, welcome to another episode of Producers Showcase. I'm Steve Poulos. Again, I want to mention to the public, if someone's interested in working with public access, whether producing their own show, learning how to work with equipment, or helping out on other shows, by all means, come on down and visit us. We're just looking forward to having people get involved. We have tons of people right now involved, but, there's always room for somebody else. And this show is a perfect example. I'd love to get somebody in here to sit in this seat and maybe to interview other producers. Or as I said, if you have your own ideas for a show, by all means, come down and visit us. On today's show, again, we're going to be talking with Gabriela Rodriguez and talking about horses. Gabriela's got a show that's going to be starting up, and we've actually been real busy down here for the holiday season, so she's agreed to kind of put it off for another week or so to actually start her own show, which I appreciate. It gives us a little bit of breathing room. Anyway, let me introduce you folks if you haven't met her yet. Gabriela. Gabriela.
Hi, Steve.
Thanks very much for being on the show again and for putting up with me. And I seem you came prepared today, though, in case I
did.
Act up. You got a horse and a whip or something over there, too.
Yeah, well, this is Susie, and this is the horse anybody can have. Susie was free, as a lot of horses are free. But usually when horses are free, there's a whole lot of money that you put into their care.
Right.
And so for Susie, all I had to do, she got a little wet last night because I forgot to bring her in out of the rain. So we toweled her down, but I don't have to worry about her getting pneumonia or anything else. She doesn't eat.
No
Care at all.
And it's funny too, because I never thought of this, but she looks great.
Yeah.
Comes with a bow and everything.
Yeah.
That's awesome. For the holidays, or is that her usual attire?
No, this is a holiday bow for this particular holiday, but we try to dress her up every once in a while. The kids love it. The adults get a kick out of it too.
Well, it's funny. I think most people grew up with some form of a toy horse. And it wasn't until I actually saw it that I realized that even for those of us that didn't have rocking horses, most of the boys had those, I don't know, they were like a stick with a horse's head on them.
Yeah, I think I had one of those too.
Yeah.
I think I have the remnants still.
I've been across the country a few times on one of those, I think, as a kid, Wore my mother out. I think you could see the lines on the floor from dragging it all over.
Well, you don't have to worry about falling off that way.
No.
Well, if you fall off,
unless
it's not going to be the
clumsy,
horse's fault, right?
In which case, I fell a few times, I guess. But,
yeah.
But that's awesome.
Yeah, so we try to do some fun things with everything that we do because the underlying message of what we have, our philosophy, is very serious. So we try to bring in a little humor, a little lightness to everything that we do. And this little horse was out in the street. She needed a home, so I picked her up, and I tell people the story. And it's an analogy about what happens sometimes in reality, because this is supposed to be a reality show about horses and what happens with a horse on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, but don't I remember the story? As you drove away, some little girl was running down the road screaming.
I told you. I didn't know if you were going to bring that up. No, it was.
No, I'm just kidding. I know it didn't really happen.
But it was, the story is that I was just minding my own business like I usually am. Things happen. But I was just driving down the road, and I saw what looked like a lot of things that people put out, free. And they were on the side of the road, and I was driving by, and I saw, for a flash, I saw what looked like a little horse. So I thought, oh, geez, I have to go back and see if maybe I can take that little horse. So I usually don't pick things up off the side of the road, but I couldn't help myself. And I thought, oh, I'm so glad this isn't a real horse. My husband, who had been in front of me, I called him because he didn't know I was supposed to be following him. So I called him, I said, I just saw a horse, I need to pick up the horse.
Oh, no.
He actually thought that maybe I actually saw a real horse, and I'm sure his heart was just sinking because, obviously that's not the kind of thing that I want to do because I can't take care of another horse, and I know that. But it was just a little baby horse, and what was kind of sad, and I'll always remember this, is when I picked up the horse to put it in the car, I looked up, and at the window there was this little girl.
Oh.
Yeah, I told you that story, right?
Well, I didn't really. I was just kidding.
Well, no, it really did happen.
Oh.
She was just staring out the window, and I felt so badly, but I already had the horse in the car, and all I could think of was, I'm so glad it's not a real one.
So you just took
So
off running.
I took
No,
off.
it
Said,
probably,
"Oh,
I mean,
geez."
as you know, people do that. They put stuff out like that. I mean, half the stuff that we have in here, honestly,
I believe it. Yeah.
perfect example of a table that some of the volunteers come in. We have a coffee table over there they found on the
Yeah.
side of the road, and hey, put it to good use, and that's obviously we're doing.
Yeah.
It's I mean, what you're doing. I don't know
Yeah.
what I just said, but it's a now he's
A
he's
little mascot.
yeah for his
And it's a she.
species. Oh, she.
We named her Susie. I went back and forth with a lot of different names, but it's finally decided it was Susie.
Well, that's a nice little rocket horse.
So in the summertime, because I do have maybe a little bit warped sometimes the sense of humor, but I try to enjoy myself. But I put her out in different parts of the property so she can get different views. The horses had to get used to her because they didn't know if she was real or not. So it took them a little while to realize
So
that
they
she
actually
wasn't.
do notice.
Oh, yeah, they
Oh.
notice everything. And she looks like a horse. And if she's in the woods or in the right location and you don't see these, she could be a real horse. To them, this just could be something sticking out and they don't know what it is. So they were a little bit concerned at first. But once I let them smell her to see that she was indeed not real and that she wasn't going to hurt them in any way and they couldn't play with her because she's not real, they were okay. The dogs, it was interesting, were a completely different story. And of course, it has to do with the breed of dogs or breed of horses and how they react and their personality sometimes. But the dogs had a real problem with the horse. And they didn't like the horse and they were really intimidated. And of course, the dogs were predators. So, maybe they thought that was something that, that they should be chasing or going after. So it took them a little while not to attack her because that's what their instinct was.
It's kind of their job too, right?
It's their job, yeah.
You mentioned the
Yeah.
horses are not predators; they're prey, so
Right.
they tend to look at things a little differently. It's
Yeah.
they don't really think of fight or flight; they usually think of flight first. And I'm sure,
Yeah.
but dogs, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, so it's a different, but it's an important point of view and it's important information for people out there to know because as much as we're making light of it, it's very true in the real world of having horses. The other reality of horses is I spent probably 2 or 3 hours this morning trying to make sure that their round bale of hay was covered up completely because it was pouring down rain and the winds were blowing so hard. I was trying to make sure everything around the property was safe, that they were inside. And when I was doing that, I was thinking of all the horses that perhaps in weather like this don't have shelter and how lucky my horses were to have a safe place where they could be in out of the winds and out of the rain, and how fortunate they were and how fortunate I was to be able to provide that for them.
And I think they know that because if I recall, when I was down there, the last time I was down there, which I found amazing, but I mean, it makes sense after you've been exposed to it, but was that you opened up the door to their
Stalls?
stalls and said, "You have to go to the bathroom?"
Oh, yeah.
And the little one, is that
Lexi. Yeah.
walked out, went over, went to the bathroom, came right back in because it was a fairly warm day, but I think it started to rain a little bit that day too. So it was like, yeah, I'll go to the bathroom, but I want to go back in where it's nice and everything. And
Yeah.
I thought only dogs would do that.
Yeah. Well, you never know until you try it. And when I got the horses home, as soon as you get your horses home and they're in a place where you can spend more time with them, you can do that in barns sometimes, but it's a little more difficult. You find out all kinds of things that you can do that you never imagined that they could do. But it just takes time and the ability to be able to do it and put the time into it. And I do a lot of documentation because that's my job.
Yeah.
So that I can teach other people how to do it and then that I know what it took in order for them to be able to do that. But as far as that particular thing, this morning that was a challenge because they didn't want to get out of their stalls and neither did the dogs. They didn't want to get out of the house and the people, I can tell you, didn't want to go out either. But I had to ask them to, and I had to accompany them out so that they could do what they needed to do their business and then go back into their stalls. And a lot of people, I won't get on a tangent too much with this, but a lot of people don't realize that horses can learn words. They know words. I think it's documented that dogs may know up to maybe 300 words. I think George would probably know exactly. But horses, when you work with them and spend so much time with them, can learn words too, and they can learn phrases. So one of the phrases they know is, "It's time to go to the bathroom."
And that's right.
And
That's
they
what
do
you
it.
use. And I'm
Time to
like,
go to the bathroom.
okay, she's doing this just for television, but of course
Nope.
that. Now, let me ask you. You mentioned when you took the horses home, because this is kind of always interested me, and it's a really a good key point to this. When Now, I'm sure there are a lot of species like this, but the ones that come to mind are, for instance, parrots, or especially parakeets.
Hmm.
A lot of people growing up, it was very popular for a house to have parakeets. And I, oh God, a bunch of years ago mentioned to somebody that was a biologist or something, but also had a lot of birds, and which is a different, I forget what they call them, but
Hmm.
I mentioned that I never had a parrot, and I love the talk. I said the only thing we had were parakeets growing up, and he said, "Oh well, you can teach parakeet to talk too. They won't all do it, but they can do it to a certain extent." And I'm like, "Oh come on, no." I found that out that apparently, if they have a mirror, number one, or another parrot in there to communicate with, they don't have any need to kind of listen to you and to learn, or it's very difficult to do it. But if they don't see what they perceive as another parrot, or have another parrot in there, you actually can train parakeets to a certain extent to make sounds and to do that. Is it similar with horses in the sense that when you get them really young and they haven't grown up in a stall with 10 other horses or whatever, that you can probably teach them more than you would be able to if they came from an environment like that? Or is it just a simple case of spending a lot of time with them and loving care and all that?
I would say it's the time. I would say you could get a horse when the horse is 15. You can get, because I did that with one of my horses at 17. And he
Was
came
that
from
Blue?
a very abusive situation, so he had to get through all of that before we could even start from scratch again. And my little horse, Lexi, I've had her since she was 6 months old, so I've had the privilege and to be able to have all that influence with
Yeah.
her. But I think you can do that with any horse, but it's the time. And that's the thing that people, I think a lot of people may not understand, that it takes a whole lot of time to be one of those elite riders, a whole lot of time to teach your horse anything. I mean, look at all of us with the obligations that we have in our daily life, and we try to give the time that we can just to the dogs or the cat that's inside. It's very difficult. So you have to make a lot of sacrifices. You may not be able to go on those vacations. You may not have the life that you had before, but you have to make that decision. And you can't, well, you shouldn't, you should always, I believe, do things in the horse's best interest, or at least consider it. And in the horse's best interest would not be to just leave them and not teach them anything, because they need mental stimulation like we talked about before. And they're better all the way around and safer, and that's what everybody wants, is a safe horse. So if you do that, you can get that, and you can have a whole lot of fun with them in a lot of different ways.
Now, there was talk about, and I don't know that we talked about it, but of course, as a lot of people that watch the channel know, there's another show with Mona Jerome, Horse Tales. Different angle that comes about, obviously, wild Mustangs
Yeah.
that have been rescued. But about the fact that it's about $5 a day for a bale of hay or something to feed
Yeah.
a horse,
Yeah.
which, as was mentioned, $150 a month maybe, on average, to
Yeah,
feed,
yeah,
just to feed them.
yeah, just the hay, not the
Right,
grain.
just
Yeah.
the hay. But it would seem to me that it's not just all about whether or not you have the money. The time seems like that's the biggest thing.
Yeah.
I mean, you could have all the money in the world, but if you're not going to have the time to take care of the animal.
Yeah, it's an investment. I've always thought for many people, including myself, that it would be hard to do what you need to in the best interest of the horse with more than two. It's hard enough with two, maybe three. That would be a bit of a stretch. But even doing things, I think we talked about this before, things that I should be doing every single day, like feeling their legs to make sure there isn't any puffiness or swelling, making sure that their feet are okay. It all takes maybe a minute for each leg, say 4 minutes or 5 minutes a day. But believe it or not, that's something that sometimes we miss. And sometimes I don't clean my horse's feet every day. And I feel badly for admitting that, but it's an admission of my being a human being and taking as good care as I do of my horses and maybe never missing 2 days. But sometimes I think, oh, geez, I didn't check my horse's feet today. And that could be detrimental to the horse because they could have a stone in there. It could be causing them a little bit of discomfort or something worse. So there's a lot of just very basic fundamental things that need to be done to have these animals that live outside, because that's the biggest piece, is that they're out there. And so it takes more work. And this time of year, as we're getting into winter, it's a whole lot more work because you have to be out there in the elements with them.
Now, is it good for them to still go out somewhat during the winter?
It's very important for them to go
As
out as much as
exercise and
possible.
stuff, and
Not well. The exercise can be limited because they can't run on frozen ground. The ground, when the ground is frozen, it's very hard, and it's hard on us when we walk on the ground. It's very difficult physically on the muscles and tendons. They take a beating. But for a horse to do something like that, they could get a lot of concussions. They could really hurt their feet and their legs. So they don't. They're smart. They walk very slowly and very carefully. So where we live now, since the ground is already frozen somewhat, they're not running anymore anywhere. They're walking, and they probably won't be able to run until there's some snow covering. And then they'll start running again. And that means that I can't ride either. I can ride out on the road, but I really can't do any more than walk. I can't trot. You shouldn't trot because that is a lot of, it can cause a lot of damage to your horse's legs, just like it can for us.
right.
It's the same thing.
But what is the, because you said, well, obviously they need to go outside.
Yes.
But it's not just that. What are the other benefits to them being out? Is it stimulation?
Yeah.
Fresh air?
Fresh air is really important for their lungs because they're out of a dusty environment.
Okay.
That's important. Stimulation because they can go out and look around and,
Right.
and eat their hay and move. Moving is very important psychologically, but also for their digestive system. It's one of the most important things that a horse can do. It's not good to have a horse not move any more than it is a person sitting in a position for a long period of time or not able to move. It's not good for our digestive systems either.
Right.
And so if you look at how people are or look at yourself and know how you feel sometimes physically, you can understand how a horse might feel. So for all those reasons, it's important for them to be outside, get out of the dusty environment, breathe some fresh air even though it might be cold. Now, I don't leave my horses outside in horribly inclement weather. If it's really windy or below a certain temperature, they go in. But they don't go in, they're not in 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
Right.
They're out, if it's really difficult to put them out because the weather's very inclement, I'll take them out even if it's just for 2 or 3 hours, and I'll go through the trouble of putting on a blanket or a coat, whatever it is that they need, because they need to get out of that barn. You can imagine how it would be to be locked up in your house, right? We talked about that before. It's the same thing for the horses. So they need to get out. Yeah.
Now, you know, obviously we talked about stimulation and everything, but like, for instance, their coat. Does that have any effect on whether or not they get out, that it builds it up better, or are they going to get a winter kind of coat anyway because they're in the barn even in the cold?
Well, that's probably something that we will take a lot more time to discuss because there's a lot of variables there, but all horses in health will get a winter coat. And every horse will get a different type of coat. I've had 3 horses. Fritz my big horse has an entirely different type of fur coat than Lexi does. So, but Lexi's younger and Fritz is older, which means there are already metabolic changes taking place in him that she's not experiencing. So he may be the one that needs to be blanketed or helped out a little bit if he's outside. But they do get a nice winter coat, but if that winter coat gets wet, and it's thick especially, it's very hard, it takes a long time for that horse to dry, they could get very sick.
Okay.
And that's something that a lot of people don't realize either. They definitely need shelter. And we will do a show I've asked Liam Hughes, who's the director of animal welfare in Augusta, to come on a show, and he's agreed, so we can ask him questions about what you need to know before you get a horse as far as the laws in Maine are concerned. And we'll also talk about town ordinances and those types of things, because it's important. If you're going to get a horse, you need to know, get all that information first.
Well,
So that'll be another show.
I drive by a place going home every day that there is some type of a rescue. They have probably about a dozen horses out there that are in various stages. I mean, you can see some of them have been abused, and they're definitely not showpieces, but they're still awesome. But I noticed that the coats on them, it was just phenomenal. But they do spend a lot of time outdoors too, probably more so than yours do. But it was just, it's not something, I would have thought about, but it just, you can see it. I mean, it's quite a coat that they have.
Yeah, that winter coat will protect them. It's very, there are a lot of things that you need to know when you have a horse as far as taking care of them in the wintertime, because in addition to having that coat, a lot of people don't remember that if you put a blanket on them and continuously blanket them, it pushes the coat down. So instead of the coat being raised to help with the wind, which is something that happens naturally with their coats, it's pushed down, so now all of a sudden they don't have the protection that they did.
Plus, I guess it would be like a down jacket in the sense that the insulating part is the air in between
Yes,
the
that's a great
hairs
analogy.
probably, and when you mat it down, it doesn't work as well. Yeah, I hadn't thought of that. See, these are all things that really,
Very interesting.
you have a lot of people that are probably well-intentioned and love the animal, but don't take the time, which is something that your show becomes a very valuable show in the sense that you're bringing to light some things that people, like I said, honest, well-intentioned people don't think about. But the more you look at some of these things, the more you realize how much you don't know.
Yeah.
And really, it would seem to me that it's preventative in the sense that, if you take good care of the animal, it's going to cost a lot less. The horse is going to be obviously happier, and if you do use them to ride or just for companionship and everything, you're going to, make out a lot better. And because these animals now, that was another thing. I didn't realize that myself, but how old did you say the average horse can get to?
Horses these days in good care can live into their 30s. There have been horses, I think the oldest horse on record, and I may be wrong about this, but I think it was 62, which is fairly old. And there can be other horses that people just don't know about. This just happened to be a documented case, but it's unusual. But horses definitely can live into their 30s, sometimes into their 40s. But when you consider that the age of the animal, and you multiply that by 3, that's in human years, then it tells you about how old that horse is and how much that horse has aged, not only physically in what you can see, but internally as far as the organs go. But because horses are used the way they're used for riding and in all these sports like dressage and jumping, they take a toll on the horses' bodies. And so a lot of times horses don't live longer because they've been injured, and they don't come back from those injuries, and the injuries can be so severe that they may need to be euthanized. So it's something that if you're going to do sports, especially at that level, it's good information and you should know. Just as if you became a runner, which I used to be, you need to know what the side effects are of running. And if your body was really meant to do that, of course you get the best shoes that you can, and you maybe don't run on really hard surfaces. Maybe you run on the edge of the road, on the ground, where it's a little bit softer. But you need to, and you stretch and you warm up and you cool down, and these are all things that athletes do. And the horse is an athlete, and the same things apply to that animal. And those tendons and ligaments, I mean, it's amazing how many bones are in those legs. And if you saw those legs, which we'll do on the show, you would just be amazed that they can even do the things that they can. But a lot of these things are very unnatural for them, which is why the injuries do tend to happen.
Now, is that why you see, and I don't really per se like horse racing or anything. Never really watched it, although I did watch with my wife. She's always loved that.
Yeah.
Last year, and I noticed afterwards, they were walking kept continually walking the horses after the race. Is that the same way that you, like you were saying, where they gotta warm up, but they also have to
Cool down.
cool down
Yeah, yeah.
and loosen up and get,
The same as a person. It's the same thing. And one of the things that you were talking about with horses in the wintertime and having those fur coats, if you do ride your horse, you can do many different things. You can clip the horse, and again, we can talk about these things in more detail, but if you're riding your horse and your horse gets sweaty, well, you can tell me what happens to the animal if you've got a horse in 20-degree temperatures that's sweaty.
right.
That might be a problem. Same as with a
Hypothermia.
person. Exactly. Yeah. So there's a lot of things that you have to think about. I remember when I first got into a situation where I had my horse. I can't remember what I did. I didn't know certainly as much as I do now, but I decided to give my horse a bath. And it was in November, but I was in a barn that was temperature controlled. So, and this is how naive I was, and even though I have, a background in health and science and all of that, evidently it didn't help me then. But I gave my horse a bath because I thought it would be the last one before the spring, and he had his fur coat. And I remember the next day I had blankets, so you can put blankets on and keep changing the blankets so that you can keep removing the water from the horse. But he didn't dry, and the handlers at this particular barn had to keep changing those blankets and even use a blow dryer in order to continue drying him up. Otherwise, he could have gotten very, very sick. Sometimes you learn things that way. But say I hadn't been in a barn where somebody had done that. What would have happened to him? So I was very fortunate, but I'll never make that mistake again. And of course,
Well, it's
now
a
I
valuable
know
lesson.
it makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's a lesson. Sometimes we learn those lessons at the sake of our horse has to pay for those lessons, or our dog.
Or
But
you
the
too,
point is you learn.
financially.
Well, yeah, there's the
That's
vet
always
bills.
an aspect of it, I guess,
It
if you're
is.
going to take over. So it was a tough lesson, but
It was a very good one.
the difference is you learned it. I'm sure there are people out there probably that shouldn't have an animal anyway that do, but don't. That doesn't sink in, and that's why they end up in all kinds of
Yeah.
problems.
And I think there's probably even more people that have really good instincts and something just doesn't feel right to them, but they can't put their finger on it. And they know that they need to do something different, but they don't know what it is, and they get 20 different opinions, but opinions are opinions unless they
Instead
don't
of
have
getting it from,
documentation.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, so it's important to do your own research. Now that we have the internet, it's
I'm just
really
going to
easy
say
to
there's
do.
really no excuse. But of course, there again, and I don't know
It's
about
time.
horses.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I don't know about horses, but I know in doing a lot of other, like medical is a perfect example. You have to know the right sources to go through or go to for that
Yeah.
information as well. You just can't listen to, John Smith in Arizona that's going to tell you everything you ever want to know about horses.
Right.
And come to find out he probably knows less than,
Yeah.
I do.
Yeah, and again, they're well-meaning, but they just could be the wrong information. It could be really detrimental to your horse. So you've got to do your own homework, and you've got to figure out what kind of horse you have and what your horse needs, and get information from a professional source.
Now, I'm sure on your show you'll help people
Mm-hmm.
find those places, but you just said something that I got to kind of jump into. I hope you don't
Not
mind.
at all.
I don't know what direction you.
No.
You said what type of horse you have. Does that matter?
It does. Say if you have a horse that you are competing in, and you clip that horse. And when people clip the horses, it's actually really pretty, and the pattern looks very nice. But there's different types of clippings, and they do that so that the horse, if you're really riding that horse hard and working that horse hard, they don't sweat as much. And so you can keep them dry or not have to worry about blanketing them. So that's what I mean with the type of care and the type of things that you do with your horse. As far as horses go, generally speaking, they all need some very basic fundamental types of care. Now, an older horse is different than a younger horse. So an older horse might have more trouble, and you have to give that older horse more care than a younger horse. But by and large, they all need certain things.
But is it the same as, like, for instance, dogs? I know a little bit about that. Certain breeds have predisposition for certain ailments. Is that the same with horses? Do you know?
Yeah, with certain breeds have more trouble with certain things. It just depends. For example, gray horses, which look white, but they're actually called grays, have a predispositions to certain types of cancers.
Oh,
So, with every horse comes certain things, and they're doing more and more research and getting more and more documentation about these sort of things. So again, if you get a gray horse, you know that you need to check
so
on a regular basis. Yeah,
knowledge is the key.
knowledge is very important.
Now, and also, if somebody wants to get a horse, especially if you don't have a lot of money and you do sort of semi-rescue an animal
Yeah.
from someplace, they're not going to be typically young. They might be, but it's a good idea probably to research the types of horses beforehand to make sure that it's a type that you can afford and/or the time,
Yeah.
spend the time with, and
Yeah, if you get any horse, probably the amount of time that you spend with the horse is going to be the same for all of them because they all need it. They all need to be groomed. They all need to be fed. If you take a little horse like Lexi, who's a little Arabian, she's around 1,000 pounds, so that $5 a day for a bale is probably, fairly accurate. But if you have a large horse like Fritz or a draft horse, forget it. You're
Yeah.
going to be going through way more than that, and the horse is needed.
so you have to know this going into it. If
Yeah,
you're
you
getting
should.
a horse as basically as a pet or a companion, not necessarily to work or to compete or anything, it makes a good idea to know that, as you say, a horse that's like 18 and 19 hands is going to be a little different than one that's like 14 hands.
Absolutely. Yeah, even in the regular work and management that you do, a bigger horse is just bigger things, bigger grooming. When I give Fritz a bath, sometimes I divide it in 2 days. I do his back half and then I do his front half because I have to stand on something in order to wash him because he's so tall and so big. But it's almost like washing a small car. With Lexi, I can do it in just a few minutes. It doesn't take very long. But yeah, all those things are specific to the horse that you have. If you have a hot-blooded thoroughbred horse that burns what you give them quickly because their metabolism is so high, it's going to be a lot different than a horse that's a draft horse, that's a cold blood, that it doesn't have that type of metabolism, yet needs probably maybe twice as much food as the other horse.
Yeah, those are definitely things to.
Yeah, and the grain, that's always been an issue because grain is very unnatural for horses, but they need certain vitamins and minerals just like we do that they don't get in the hay because the hay is dry grass. So there are very few nutrients in that hay. And in order to make sure that the horse has everything that he needs, enough protein and carbohydrates, but especially the protein, you have to do some research and you have to know what kind to give them and how much to give them because, again, their digestive systems are very sensitive. So you can't give them too much or too little, and you're going to have an unhealthy animal. Just like us, it's all the same. It's all the same. There's really no mystery to it. You know what your diet is, and you know carbohydrates are carbohydrates, proteins are proteins. They're building blocks for everything. And they are for us, they are for every animal, every living thing. So if you look at it that way, I mean, there's really no mystery behind it.
Now let me ask you, change gears just slightly.
Okay.
I wasn't sure when I saw you today whether I was in trouble or it was in a part of but I noticed you brought some equipment with you.
Yeah, it was show and tell.
Okay.
Show and tell. So I brought Susie along,
Yeah.
and then when I left this morning, I thought, well, I brought the saddle the last time and showed people what a saddle looks like that isn't such a good thing to put on a horse's back because of the shape that the saddle was in. And then, we talk about these so often that I thought I'd bring a few, but I forgot my dressage whip. That's a really nice one. But, it's interesting to me, again, coming from my perspective, and not being a horse person that has grown up within the culture of all of this, the word whip to me isn't a very nice word anyway. When I show these to people, sometimes I have programs where I have children, and when I pull the whips out, or actually these are crops, when I pull them out, some of the kids step back. that's the reaction that you get when you pull these things out. Now, we're intelligent human beings, we're not horses, but our instincts sometimes are very similar. When you pull these out to a horse, if a horse has ever been abused with one, you can tell by their reaction of fear in their eye. But a lot of times when you take something like this out, it does look like something that might be a little bit of a threat. The sad thing is, or unfortunate thing is, that a lot of people don't realize that these are actually supposed to be an extension of your arm. Because when you work with a horse, the horse is really big. So in order to keep a safe space from the horse, and a little bit later on, we're going to put on a video right from YouTube
Yes.
of Hansa Blaha. And he's just an amazing, amazing horseman. But he has something like this. I mean, it doesn't have to be a crop. You can get a stick. You can use anything you want. When people come to work at our place with the horses, I even give them things that they've never worked with before, like pieces of garland, because a piece of garland is colorful. It makes a little bit of a noise. But if you, by mistake, touch the horse with it, it's not going to hurt the horse. And our horses aren't afraid of it because, of course, they know what they are. So you can use anything. They don't have to be crops, but this is traditional in English. The Western people have other things. The English people use these. And they are used usually from behind. If you're riding a horse, you keep it along the side, and you use it to supposedly tap a horse, but sometimes that tapping may become a little bit harsher.
Well, I noticed that when they
You've
run.
seen that, yeah. Yeah, well, you know, there's no mistaking that. A lot of people use these in the incorrect way. And the horses get hurt because underneath the fur, it was interesting. I asked somebody not too long ago what they thought. He was a little boy, but I said, what do you think is under the fur of a horse? And he didn't know. And a lot of people probably don't know, but it's just skin like ours. So it's the same. So if you take one of these, and I give these to people sometimes, and I say, well, you know, see what it feels like to you. See what it feels like if you tap yourself. That really doesn't hurt you, but if you really use this to hit, to strike, it hurts. And that's how it feels to a horse. So these will make horses go faster. Oh, for sure. The horse will go a lot faster. But, you know, think of it in terms of a person. If I was behind you with one of these, or even in front of you, and I made these movements, and I'm away from you, and doesn't that feel a little bit intimidating? I mean, what could I do with this, right?
Oh, it would shock me, that's for sure.
Well, you know, sometimes the shock factor works because people need to understand that this is how a horse's psyche works too, and it's through instinct. So these are great. I mean, you can use them as extensions of the arm, but that's all that they should be used for. And there's some really, really pretty ones. And what's interesting about all these crops and all this paraphernalia that we use is that some of it is just really, really pretty. And some of them can be really, really expensive. And it seems with people sometimes the more expensive and the prettier, the more they want it. Because it all goes with that picture and that image that we have sometimes of ourselves on that horse, looking majestic and
Almost like a fantasy in my case.
It's a
but
fantasy.
anyway.
Well, no. It actually is a fantasy. It's a very intoxicating experience, and I like that word, intoxicating, because it really is. And that one fantasy may inspire somebody to go and get a horse for the wrong reasons. Because that's what they want, that's what they're projecting, that's the image that they see of themselves, that's what they want to be. But now we have this animal that we're putting into the picture, and then of course we're getting the crops and putting the bits in the mouth, and these are inexperienced hands, and so what's happening? Probably nothing good. Yeah. So, next time I come, I'll bring my dressage whip, and I'll even bring some of the long whips. But again, you know, these can be used as a weapon, but they're not meant to be used as a weapon. They're supposed to tap. But if you ride correctly, you don't need any of this. All you need is your hand. All you need is your leg. You don't need the spurs. You don't need any of that. But in order to be able to do that correctly, you know, the time issue
Is that time
that's
thing
a
again.
very years years and years and years.
Well, as you mentioned, you have a video that you were going to show at the end of this that I know got a chance to watch. Amazing video, folks. If you please don't turn the channel. You need to watch this because you'll be like me, kind of in awe. I couldn't believe you could do that with a horse. But this guy doesn't use a saddle or any whips or anything.
No, no.
Kind of amazing.
His name is Hansa Blanca, and I think Blaha, excuse me, and I think they're going to show that caption with his name on the video when people see it. But this is just incredible. But what this man has done is shown people how you can how you can work with horses without any of this paraphernalia. Now he does have a little stick, and at one point I think he has something that's the length of, for people that know a dressage whip. But you'll notice that he never ever uses them for anything except to show the horse the direction.
The direction, yeah. I noticed he would like just
Yeah.
kind of guide it a little bit using that and not whack them with it.
No, never. And the relationship that this man has with these horses is just amazing. And I want people to see it so that they can see that this is the kind of relationship that they can also have with their horse. Again, this takes time. I don't know how many years he's spent working with these horses, and he works with 4 of them at a time. But basically what he does, he has absolutely no aids. Aids is the word that the different sporting associations use to refer to bits, spurs, the crops, the legs,
and tools,
things to control. Things to control the horse. And you don't have to use any of that. But it takes a lot of time to become that skilled. And it also takes a lot of courage because, again, you have these very, very large animals. And it takes an enormous amount of dedication. So he's been able to do it. He's very young. I think he may be in his 30s, but he's been, I think working with horses since he was about 9. But what I love about him is that he calls himself, or I think they call him, a natural horseman. That word means or defines natural horsemanship, which is something that's come around within the last decade within horses. And the opposing force to that would be what? Unnatural horsemanship, and which actually is with the crops and the spurs and all these things that people use to control their horses' movements. He is a natural horsemanship. I don't call myself that. I just call myself somebody that can do things with kindness and compassion and direction and leadership. But it's basically the same thing. And again, natural horsemanship sounds wonderful, but you have to be careful because not everyone that claims to work in that manner even knows what they may be doing or is doing it correctly. I had an experience with someone who called themselves a natural, someone that did natural horsemanship, but her idea of natural horsemanship was to hit my horse in the eye if she was being threatening at all. And I didn't feel that that was very natural. It took me about a year to take her out of the sense that she thought she was going to be hit every time I raised my hand after that. So again, people come from all walks of life and they claim to do all kinds of different things, and you have to do your research and know what you're doing before you put your horse in anybody's hands. And you have to trust your instincts too. So what he does is just amazing because he does it out in the open where we like to do the same types of things that he does. And I can do what he does in this video to a very small degree with one horse. And so essentially, and if we get a chance to do this sometime, probably next year, I'd love to videotape it, but she'll follow me alongside without any lead, without any connection to me, any physical connection, and we'll go over jumps and go in one direction, go in the other direction, we walk and we trot, and she stays right with me in the open, in the paddock, with grass. And that's a pretty amazing thing, but it's taken me, with everything that I have in my life, years and years to do this. So people can't think that it's going to happen overnight. But I think all of us like to see things happen very quickly, but you can't do that with an animal. Now, you agree there because you've had a lot of experience with animals, and you even went and you photographed, was it bears, right?
Oh, yeah, all different kinds of
all
animals.
Different kinds of animals. So you're familiar with that, and you know what happens when you force an animal to do something. You know how long it takes and how much time it takes and dedication to capture that animal the way you want. So part of what Hansa Blaha does, a lot of them are dressage movements. People are captivated by this word dressage, but all it really means, it's a French word, and all it means is training. It's very simple. Dressage is training. But when people say the word dressage, in their mind, they get visions of what you see dressage riders do. And essentially, it boils down to having horses do something very similar to what people do when they dance, and in the form of ballet, something that's very, very hard to do. So I have a background in dance, and I took ballet lessons for years and years. And I have the injuries from all that ballet. The injuries are very similar in horses, but what dressage is having a rider on a horse's back doing these very intricate movements that human dancers do themselves. So if you can imagine us trying to do these movements with 2 legs and having these horses trying to do these movements with 4 legs. But what's very captivating about this video is that this person, Hansa Blaha, is able to do these movements without any aids whatsoever. And it's interesting because the Dressage Federation, the International Dressage Federation, that makes all the decisions for how the sport is going to be done, they call what people do in dressage one of the highest levels or forms of expressions that you can have in the connection with the rider with the least amount of aid. But what's interesting about that is that you not only have usually 1 bit in the mouth, you have 2. And so you're manipulating the mouth in order to get all these movements and for them to bend their necks the way you see their necks bent. And by the way, not all horses can do that. What's interesting to me about that definition about the aids is what about the aids that are in the mouth? And you usually see dressage riders with spurs, if you notice. And so my idea of what all this dressage is for it to look so pleasing to the audience, because it is actually very, very beautiful. The horses are just amazing, and they're just gorgeous with their heads bent and doing these intricate movements of ballet. And of course they set it to music now too, so it's really, really pretty. But what people need to realize is how hard this is for horses. Now, Hansa Blaha does this without any aids at all. He doesn't have bits. He doesn't have spurs. He's riding without a saddle. Granted, you can't do this with every single horse. You can't ride every horse bareback. It's just not possible. But he has his 5 horses that he works with, and he's dedicated his life to working with them and having them learn how to cooperate. And to a degree, there's submission, but submission not in the terms of fear at all. These horses just cooperate with him, and they do it on the ground in an open pasture. Then he also rides, and he does these dressage movements and has the horses bring their legs up and round over and do movements like piafs and pirouettes and that sort of thing without any aids at all. And so if you see this video, which I hope everybody does see, it's really amazing, and then you see the Lipizzaner stallions, you'll get a good distinction about how horses do all these intricate movements with and without all these apparatus, for lack of a better term, but that's what it is.
Yeah, and I got the opportunity to work a couple of times with the Lipizzaner stallions.
Yeah.
And you know, it's really funny though when you say that, is because the last group I worked with were I guess the word is mare. They weren't stallions.
Yeah, yeah.
But they call them. But the originals were. But they're much more difficult to work with. And
well, because they have all their instincts. It's not that they're bad horses at all. It's their instinct is to mate. So of course it's very hard, and you have to control them quite a bit more usually, depending on the breed. Again, it's all depends on the personality. But to me, it just seems that would be something that you really wouldn't want to do with a horse, because it's so against their instinct to be worked like that, especially if it's a stallion. So if you get the right horse and do things with them, I think you always have to remember to be fair in what you do with the horses and not push them too hard or make them work too hard. And remember that all these movements and all these sports that we do with them cause injuries. There was an article that I read the other day where there is documented evidence now, and they put it on the table to show that dressage horses that do dressage on a regular basis, especially at the elite levels, will definitely have X number of injuries. Jumping horses will have X number of injuries. So people need to understand that. I mean, if we go over a jump, I used to be a hurdler in high school. You know, I understand what it's like to jump on one leg. I understand what it's like to miss a jump. I understand what it's like to fall. If you're on top of a horse and you're asking that horse to jump over something and the horse falls, in all likelihood, that horse is going to get injured, and that horse might not want to do that again. But you're asking that horse to do all these things, so you need to take really good care of that horse. And, you know, we always hope that or encourage people to keep their horses too, because after the horse has done so much for you, because we are the ones that got the horses and we're the ones that want to do all these things with the horses. So it would be good to take care of that horse for life and give that horse a good retirement with us, not send them off somewhere where somebody else can take care of them or
Blue factory or something.
yeah, well, definitely. Yeah, because I think we owe them that.
Yes, absolutely.
And I will say that. Yeah.
Well, listen, I think we're going to go to that clip because
Okay.
that clip is good length.
Yeah, it's about 7 minutes long, though. It's not very long,
Right.
right? And it's captivating.
And I think I will put it at the end of the show when we put it up on YouTube with a lot of the other shows. We will put a link to that particular
Good.
video, and perhaps he's got some other things up there as well.
He does. He does.
It would be well worth because it just kind of it really emphasizes, it re-emphasizes a lot
What
of
you
the
can
points
do.
you're making here on this show, and
Yeah.
gives them also something really calming and beautiful. And
Yes.
Excellent.
And I'd love to have him on the show.
well, hey, we got
should
plenty
invite
of room.
him if he's
Sure.
out there listening.
Absolutely.
We'd love to have him come. So
Hey, we never know.
no, you don't.
We've had some fabulous people over the years here, and we had a news anchor from Chicago here yesterday on the show, and we had, oh God, we've had just about everything here. Even
Yeah.
if you remember Lamb Chop, the puppet,
Oh, I
Sherry
do.
Lewis's,
I do.
and a lot of the puppets and characters that have been on over the years. The gentleman that was actually his puppet, he invented it and still makes puppets today out in California. He was here on a show. I mean,
Oh,
it's just
how neat.
amazing.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
and now you.
Oh, yes, me. And, you know, it's good in everything. I just want to say one other thing, to have
Sure.
good role models.
Sure.
And Blanca is an incredible role model. If people look at him and see what he's doing and understand it, I think they'll probably try to take better care of their horses and not push
Absolutely.
their horses more than they need to.
And as you know, because you're the one that pointed this out to me, one of the gentlemen that's a gentleman that has a show here, George Quinlan,
Yeah.
has a show. It's all about the horses, and he's
The
very
dogs.
the dogs. I
dogs,
mean,
right.
well, your horses, dogs. You always call them big dogs.
They're big
horses,
dogs.
So.
Yeah.
But all about the dogs, and George is very much like this gentleman. I've seen him do things with his animals that people can't believe. And by the way, he wanted me to thank you again because I got an email back immediately after he saw
I'm
that.
thrilled that he enjoyed it.
And told him that you had suggested I send it to him. And I sent it to my brother in Texas, who is a big horse person
Right.
as well. And he was, I got an email back with, and these are people that are in there but have never seen that.
Yeah. So he was impressed too.
Oh, very much
That
so.
makes me feel good.
Yeah, absolutely. So anytime you get stuff like that. But of course, I know you're going to do that on your show.
Right.
Anyway.
Right.
So.
Well, not a lot of people impress me to that degree. But again, I think he's a wonderful role model. People should look at him and see how he works with his horses. We try to do the same thing at Blixx Horses, and we have probably a lot of the same philosophy that he does.
And I think it would be a lot easier for people to speak with you, to maybe come visit you, than it would be to go to see him.
Yeah.
So you're
but
right
I
here.
would still love to see him, and I'd love
Oh,
to
I
meet
know.
him, and I'd love to see his horses. But you just never know. Maybe he will come on the show. Maybe
Well, that's
he'll see this.
fabulous. Well, Gabrielle, it's been fun. Thank
Yep.
you
And happy
so
Thanksgiving.
much. Same to you as well. And of course, people may see the show after Thanksgiving, but that'll explain why I look like I do afterwards.
You're red for Christmas.
Ho, ho, ho. But I guess we're going to go. We'll go to a few credits, and then we'll go to that.
Great.
We'll go to that
The 7-minute
video.
clip, yeah. Okay.
Absolutely.
All right.
Thanks again.
Thank you.
And thank you for watching, and I hope you've enjoyed this this episode. I know I have. I learned something new every day, which some people will say is it's tough to teach me anything. So I guess that means she's doing a great job. Again, thanks for watching, and hope to see you again soon. Thanks.